name is Charlie Hayes, and I'm going to be talking about the eutrophication of the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm going to start with a simple question. How does a 6,000 to 7,000 square foot dead zone appear off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico? And if you're wondering what a dead zone is, it is a portion of water which is so low in oxygen saturation that there is little to no life in it. There is a dead zone nearly the size of New Jersey in the Gulf of Mexico right now. And you're probably wondering, how does that even happen? How did that happen? Why is that there? To find the answer, you have to follow the Mississippi River basin all the way up the 31 surrounding Midwestern states that the Mississippi River runs through. How a dead zone is formed is that excess sewage, animal waste, and chemical fertilizer, which pay attention to that one, they run through the Mississippi River and down into the Gulf of Mexico. And what that then does is all the nutrients from that mesh overfeed the algae and overpopulate the algae to such a point that the fish can't feed on it fast enough, and it is left to just die. And the bacteria breaking down that algae it uses a chemical process that takes the oxygen out of the water. While sewage and animal waste and all that definitely contributes to it, the biggest contributor to this issue is the chemical fertilizer that the agricultural industry uses. And what this chemical fertilizer has, it has nitrogen and phosphorus, which plants absolutely love. But the issue is that the agricultural industry has a habit of over-caking and over-applying this fertilizer to such a degree that the plants and the crops cannot eat all of it before it gets washed out into the surrounding river and down into the Gulf, where it then overfeeds the algae. And if nothing is done about it, it will get worse.
So, there are numerous stakeholders involved in this wicked problem. Among them are the locals of the Gulf, farmers in the agriculture industry, fishermen in the fishing industry, the fertilizer companies, and environmental scientists or organizations such as the Environmental Protection Agency and the Mississippi River Collaborative, each with their own values, beliefs, and norms. The locals certainly understand the urgency of the problem and see the need to address it as soon as possible. Aside from the ecosystem, the damage being done affects the local people's economy by negatively impacting tourism and affects the amount of fish local fishermen can bring in. For fishermen, both local and from the U.S., it's not just a source of food they provide, it's also their livelihood. Should nothing be done about it, the dead zone in the Gulf and ecological collapse occur, their livelihoods would be uprooted. This graph represents the increase in nitrate and levels of silicate concentrations in the northern Gulf, specifically looking at changes in the last couple of decades. If this trend continues, the environment will continue to be heavily impacted, as well as the locals' livelihood in a negative manner. As for the fertilizer industry, both them and the economy directly benefit from the agriculture business. Farmers, being so far away from the problem, don't necessarily understand the urgency of this issue as long as fish are still there and fishermen can still fish. Typically, farmers using as much nitrogen fertilizer as possible to get maximum yield out of a crop is a very normal practice on farms in the U.S., so to ask them to use less could be the equivalent of asking them to produce less food.
The main driver of eutrophication in the Gulf of Mexico is the overuse of fertilizer along the Mississippi River, specifically by farmers and the agriculture industry. The National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition estimates that 7 million metric tons of nitrogen fertilizer is used in the Mississippi River basin annually. An indirect driver of this issue is an ever-growing population, which creates a constantly increasing demand for food. The impact of the eutrophication zone, or dead zone, in the Gulf of Mexico is an environmental degradation and a decline in ecosystem biodiversity, including fish kills. It creates a habitat loss for marine species. A decline in fish populations results in smaller hauls for fishermen and a poorer fishing economy. This impact on fishermen results in a loss of their livelihood and a cultural shift in fishing communities. One response to the eutrophication zone is a change in migration of marine species in order to find suitable habitat ranges. Fishermen have responded to this change in location of fish populations by traveling farther out to sea to fish. Environmental experts have responded to this issue by outlining strategies for farmers to implement, including increased efficiency of fertilizer application, planting crops that will retain excess nutrients, and rerouting soil drainage systems. The National Science and Technology Council estimates that a 40% reduction in nitrogen flux to the Gulf is necessary to alleviate the eutrophication zone.
With the volatile nature such as with the eutrophication of the Gulf of Mexico, if any stakeholder does not adhere to the new regulations, policies, or proven techniques that are objectively better, then the issue will still persist. Our own economical demands reinforce some of the damaging behaviors within this issue. As we hold fast to our culture of mass consumption, we will continue to make the earth pay the real price. The Gulf of Mexico needs action from the bigger fish, pun intended. This issue is too widespread and deeply involved to be solved without the help of governance. We need our own government to in place policies, programs, and organizations with proper funding and enforcing mechanisms to ensure that action will be taken. Funding is especially important, as without it, any policy, research group, or organization will be less than functional. New means of management or policies to dictate the treatment of the Gulf would only be worth the paper they're written on if not enforced. Non-point pollution is also in dire need of being regulated. Overcoming the backlash of the agricultural and fishing industries will require us to see through the deception and outcries for keeping things the way they are. We need public figures to advocate for change and become the voice that has so longed to be heard by those who cannot speak our language, but still just the same, suffer underneath our actions and gross negligence. Commercial maritime activity, domestic or foreign, will have to avoid the Gulf of Mexico at all costs. Fishing the dead zone while it is in recovery will only bring us back to where we were. There needs to be a clear communication between environmental agencies, agricultural industries, and fishing industries, and through that communication, we need action.
Solving the issue of the eutrophic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is going to require major agricultural change. If real long-term change is to happen, change must first start with the mentality of farmers and consumers alike. The simplest and most effective way to reduce eutrophic runoff into our lakes and rivers would be by simply reducing the amount of synthetic fertilizers used. Though simple in theory, this could spark huge backlash from farmers that fear the loss of their yields. To avoid this, farmers are going to have to seek innovative, sustainable farming methods that allow them to keep their high yields. One example of this is through alternative draining that prevents eutrophic waters from ever reaching our lakes and rivers. This could be done by using artificial ponds where nutrient runoff is captured and reused, whether it be by pumping the water back into the fields or by implementing floating hydroponic systems in the ponds that would absorb the excess nutrients. Implementing change to sustainable farming will be difficult but absolutely necessary if we are to prevent further disaster in the Gulf of Mexico.